Right off the bat, this video is going to be very spoiler heavy. I know many folks don't like to have their bosses and lore spoiled when it comes to Souls-like games, so please keep that in mind. I will be touching on all of that. If you're here looking for a basic yes or no on whether I think you should play this game, then the answer varies, but it mostly leans towards yes. If you're a Souls veteran, and I do mean a veteran, not just someone who's beaten the games, but is actually good at them, then yes, play and love this game. If you've beaten all or most of the Souls games, but are by no means an expert, give this game a spin for sure. But don't be surprised if you bounce off of it. And if you're completely new to the genre, or have only dabbled in it, then go play Dark Souls or Bloodborne first. The reason I offer these initial assessments is because Lies of P, while amazing, is an extremely difficult game that demands a lot from the player, more than was expected of me in any Souls-like game. Some of the bosses feel improperly balanced for a multitude of reasons, including, but not limited to, second phases, long combos, and high endurance and HP. More than that though, the main issue is that Lies of P attempts to mesh mechanics and systems from Bloodborne and Sekiro together without understanding why they worked independently. As we will come to see, you're expected to blend the aggression promoted in Bloodborne with the deflection system of Sekiro, and it isn't a good combo. Normally I don't start my videos with such a flat, should you play this, yes or no, but that's how I truly feel, and I think it's important for you to understand that. This is a title that quickly went up my favorite games of the year list, but has also fallen back down the ranks as I spent more time with it. Make no mistakes though, this is an excellent Souls-like, especially for those yearning for a new iteration, but I think it has some major problems. Okay, from here on out, spoilers will follow, so let's get into the critique. It doesn't feel right to begin talking about this title without first establishing its setting. It shocked me to realize that the Pinocchio IP has been public domain since 1940, despite how recognizable Carlo Collodi's tale has become. Most people, myself included, will be most familiar with Disney's 1940 adaptation of the book. In it, a man named Geppetto carves a puppet out of a magical piece of wood, and it comes to life. This puppet, Pinocchio, goes on a series of adventures while learning what it means to be human. When lying, Pinocchio's nose would grow, but upon completing good deeds, including sacrificing himself to save Geppetto, he eventually awakens to be a real boy. Through his actions, he becomes worthy of humanity, much to the delight of Geppetto, Jiminy Cricket, and others. Lies of P retells the story of Pinocchio and explores the question of humanity in a much darker setting and tone than the Disney classic. Taking place in the fictional city of Krat, a puppet doll named P awakens in an abandoned train. A voice calling out to him urges the puppet to seek shelter and safety at the Krat Hotel. Along the way, P comes to learn of the perils facing Krat. These include a mysterious frenzy causing many of the mechanical puppets to go rogue, becoming violent and killing off citizens in the process. At the same time, it's clear that something more cosmic is also afflicting the dying city. A condition called the petrification disease decimates survivors who've managed to avoid puppet onslaughts. And as the story unfolds, the player comes to learn more about the nature of these two apocalyptic events, but we'll get to that. For now, suffice it to say that you're going to encounter many of the iconic characters and themes from that original tale, including Jiminy Cricket, Geppetto, and more. Seeing this childhood tale brought to life in a new, darker, and more adult way makes for an incredible hook that's sure to lure in an audience. This was evident from the game's initial reveal. A Souls-like based on Pinocchio? Yeah, sign me up. However, if basing the game on Pinocchio was the potatoes, the real meat of the reveal came from Lies of P's obvious comparisons to Bloodborne stylistically. For 9 years now, gamers have been praying for Bloodborne 2, or at least a remaster of the original capable of running at 60 FPS, or more. So when something came along that seemingly resembled Bloodborne 2 in everything but name alone, many players were licking their chops, hoping this meal would deliver. And after just a few hours with the game, that seemed to be spot on. The similarities jumped out immediately. You awaken in a chair, choose one of 3 starter weapons, discover a gothic city clearly ravaged, crawling with maddened creatures, NPCs hiding in houses, a safe haven where NPCs can travel to and from, and a thick, weighty, dark atmosphere to it all. This, along with systems pulled right out of From Software titles, specifically Bloodborne, like losing currency upon death, challenging encounters, especially bosses, and the return of a rally-like mechanic, made me feel like my hopes had come true. A proper, unofficial sequel to Bloodborne. It was like the frozen, store-bought version of an iconic pizzeria's pie. Not the real deal, but still not bad. Hell, it borderline felt like From Software could have a potential reason to sue the developers for just how damn close it feels. We were like 2 werewolves away from that becoming a reality. As I pushed onward though, it became quite clear that while this game's paint job screams Bloodborne, a look under the hood reveals a heavy dose of Sekiro-style mechanics. I'm sure many people watching this video will already be familiar with how the legendary From Software titles play, but I want to be clear in my criticisms later, so let me establish those now from the beginning. In traditional From Software style, Lies of P gameplay is about being smart, aware, and present. You can't spam your way to victory, as instead, it's important to maintain endurance and health by punishing enemies during obvious windows. Many enemies won't stagger, so if you attempt to stun lock them to death, you'll be hit back with a powerful force that will chunk your health bar. The Pulse Cell, essentially an Estus Flask, will offset damage you take a limited number of times. Therefore, it's about playing intelligently, learning enemy patterns, being wary of environmental traps, and being rewarded for that with ample time to punish the world and its deranged denizens back. You'll find this back and forth flow to combat and exploration in all Souls-like games, and this is no exception. So let's stick with that exploration theme for a bit. Unlike Lordran, Krat and its accompanying areas are quite linear, even more so than Yharnam in Bloodborne. The levels have a critical path to a boss or new area, but also contain many optional paths that lead to rewards, often being guarded by environmental traps or tougher enemies. Sometimes it's a hidden enemy lunging at you after you go for an inconspicuous item just laying about. Other times, it's a hidden panel on the floor that triggers deadly arrows raining down on you. As always, you're free to sprint past most enemies, but doing so will mean acquiring less souls, called ergo here, meaning you won't level up as frequently and may struggle as a result. And while that point is true, I want to be clear that I didn't really do that much in my playthrough, and that's going to matter for criticism later. Anyway, while the linear level structure didn't bother me, in fact I kind of enjoyed how it allowed for them to craft a more in-the-moment story, I do think the developers were too wound up on harassing the player. From Software games have always had environmental traps to punish quick-footed players, but Lies of P takes it too far. The game is way too eager in deploying gotcha traps, where you'll at least take damage if not be killed outright. The damage is one thing, but when I'm far into a level and have managed to contend with the enemies, the last thing I want is my progress reset because a wooden walkway decides it's going to collapse. I understand instilling caution, but this tricking of the player is used far too often in Lies of P. By the time I reached the final section, I was actively leaving items behind, worrying that a dude with a big pokey electric stick might be waiting in limbo to kill me instantly. Outright killing the player takes these moments too far into the realm of frustration. It's like that scene at the beginning of The Batman, where all the criminals look into the shadows and stop what they're doing just out of fear that he might show up and he might be lurking in the shadows. For me, the Batman was often some faulty plywood, and that didn't feel great. Now, back to combat, and Lies of P attempts to do more than just the sword and shield approach of Dark Souls. It actively looks to combine elements of Sekiro's deflection mechanic with Bloodborne's rally mechanic, so let's look at those. In Bloodborne, aggression is heavily encouraged. You're meant to stay in close to the beasts and creatures haunting Yharnam, hacking and slashing away as gory red bits coat the stone streets. To make sure this happens, Bloodborne included the rallying mechanic. Every time the player took damage, they would lose health. However, a portion of that health could be reacquired without direct healing by striking back against the enemy. Regardless of if you took damage while failing a dodge or failing a parry or just getting caught up in spamming attacks, you always had a chance to get some health back, so long as you had the stamina to do so. So, in this way, players were incentivized to be brutal and malicious in combat, still being smart, but allowing for more killer instinct to take root in the playstyle. If your blood spills, replenish it with that of your enemies. It was brilliantly balanced alongside of healing vials to ensure the player had options. Lies of P incorporates a similar system with a key difference. Here, if a player takes damage without guarding, that health is forfeited, recovered only at the cost of one pulse cell charge. The recoverable health garnered by the rally mechanic is only in play if the player successfully guards against the attack. Health will be lost, but a chunk of it can be recovered by hitting the enemy back. By holding the guard button, you can guarantee this window will happen. It doesn't mean you'll get a window to strike to recover that health, but it'll be on the table at the very least. And the reason it's tough is because bosses are keen on going directly into another combo, allowing maybe one hit, sometimes two, most of the time. So you might be thinking, okay, well then let's just guard a lot. But you can't just guard all the time because every hit still does damage while also costing you stamina points. If your health depletes or your stamina runs out, you're doomed. This one change leads to a monumental shift away from the same mechanic in Bloodborne. By limiting recoverable health to guarded hits, the player is likely to play more defensively instead of aggressively swinging, which would be fine, but the enemies, particularly bosses, are designed with movesets and abilities that force the player's hand into a more aggressive playstyle. I'll get into this more later, but for some context, bosses are very much capable of performing quick combos lasting 5 to 12 hits while closing vast distances and with seemingly no stamina restrictions. They are overpowered. As a result, you'll often find yourself attempting to guard, getting caught up in a combo where your health gets shredded alongside of your stamina. If you somehow survive, you probably won't be able to recover all your health after taking multiple hits simply from striking back. And if you panic and release the guard button and take a regular hit, all that potentially recoverable health is forfeited. And on top of that, if you somehow guard against an entire combo and survive, you probably won't have enough stamina left to get in enough hits while leaving yourself with enough of it to get away once the enemy starts its next flurry of attacks. Oftentimes, the recoverable health isn't attainable against overly aggressive bosses, of which there are many. As a result, I found myself leaning towards dodging more often, but that didn't work well either. But I was playing with a slightly heavy character with a few movement restrictions. Again, more on this later, but I don't feel the game did enough to reward the player with currency to level up. I often found myself feeling underpowered and overwhelmed against tougher bosses. But I digress. For those of you who have played Lies of P, you're probably saying, well, you're not meant to guard through every attack, you're meant to parry them. And yes, that's true. Rallying is a mechanic borrowed from Bloodborne, but it seems many enemies and bosses are more interested in getting you to play a Sekiro-style encounter, executing perfect parries in a series of striking iron. By performing a perfectly timed parry, you won't forfeit any of your health, but you will still take a hit to your stamina. Again, bosses can close distances, perform long combos, and obliterate your stamina and health easily if you're relying on just dodging or guarding. The most efficient and effective way to play Lies of P is to become a parrying god, mastering all the parry windows perfectly and responding flawlessly. And that's tough, but you know what? I think that would be a perfectly okay expectation of the player if not for one fatal flaw. The deflection system of Sekiro works so well because the player is not restricted in any way by a stamina bar. They are free to sprint, attack, jump, block, and deflect at their leisure, having only to focus on maintaining their posture to avoid becoming wide open for an attack. A clear and bright bar was placed at the bottom of the screen, creating a brilliant indicator for when you needed to back off and let your posture recover before going on the offensive again. Maintain that, and you're good. Stamina, on the other hand, is a whole different beast. It costs stamina to run, to parry, to guard, and to attack in Lies of P. This, paired up with the tight windows for a successful parry, leads to many instances in which you just don't feel like you've had enough stamina or health to survive the onslaught of different bosses, even if you were amazing at parrying. One failed perfect parry, which are not easy to pull off, mind you, and your health and stamina are nearly depleted, almost guaranteeing a restart. Because of the stamina restriction, you must be nearly perfect. And so the result of all of this is a hodgepodge of mechanics and ideas from Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro all thrown into one, without fully understanding why each system works so well in their respective games. Stamina worked for the slow, methodical pace of Demon Souls and Dark Souls. Rallying worked for the aggressive playstyle of Bloodborne. And deflective parries worked for the give-and-take endurance battles of Sekiro. Lies of P crams them all together and can't come up with a good way to find a point of balance. Stamina creates a massive restriction on the player. Rallying is only useful on passive guards that already eat at your stamina and health. And the amount of times perfect parries are expected in quick succession is ludicrous. I found myself constantly having to make micro decisions on how to play when facing a single boss. Do I be aggressive? Do I be passive and hang back? Do I try to parry? Do I just guard? If you take too long to answer any of these, and if you answer incorrectly at all, you are just dead, reviving at the Stargazer with a head full of confusion. They fail to usher you into a proper playstyle, while the most effective option is being perfect at parries. I'm not saying the game can't be difficult, but failing to create an approachable and consistent mode of play outside of being perfect with parries is certainly a shortcoming. Nearly half of the bosses, really any with consistent aggression, feel painstakingly hard to overcome without cheesing or summoning help. And if you screwed up the feel of boss fights in a Soulslike, well, that's an issue. Hell, even Elden Ring was guilty of that. It just feels like Lies of P is demanding perfection from the player, which is a tall ask on its own, but paired up with some of the bosses, it feels downright unbeatable on your own. I fought every boss in the game, with the exception of the Red Fox and the Black Cat, whose questline I completed to avoid confrontation. I took them all on, so 23 of 25 bosses. Of the 23 I fought, only 16 were mandatory from what I can tell. Of those 16, 8 of them had at least one, but usually more, of the following issues. I'm going to list them off and then I'll talk about them. They include huge health pools, overly long combos, second phases going hand in hand with tedious first phases, lack of stamina restriction, ridiculous reach, and tiny windows to perform a perfect parry. I should make note that I played with a character built around technique, using fast weapons that hit more times but for less damage. Here's my final build for anyone curious. Anyway, starting with health pools. and some of these bosses are granted absurd amounts of HP relative to when they're slotted in to the experience. All bosses with 2 phases, with the exception of Champion Victor, have 2 separate health bars, which includes Fallen Archbishop Andreas, the King of Puppets, the Green Monster of the Swamp, Laxasia the Complete, Simon Manus, and the Nameless Puppet. These last 3 are the final 3 bosses fought in the game, so long as you don't have to fight Red Fox, and are fought in quick succession, which makes it extremely difficult and mind-numbing when you're so close to the end of the game, yet so far. Regardless, all 7 of these bosses have 2 health bars, which is already a lot. Not to mention, one phase of the fight will often have significantly more health than the other. On its own, this tremendous amount of health wouldn't be a deterrent, but paired up with the other issues, it just turns fights from an enjoyable endurance test to a shitty slog. Let's stick with those 2-phase fights though. There's 8 that are mandatory, accounting for half of them. What makes a 2-phase fight work best is the surprise element of it, thinking you've won only to see the boss get back up for another round. You know what ruins surprise? Repetition, and Lies of P can't help itself. Instead of getting that exciting feeling that a round 2 is coming, you instead start rolling your eyes after defeating a foe only to see a cutscene trigger instead of a trophy or achievement pop. Much like the environmental traps, Lies of P overcompensate in its attempts to be just like older brother From Software when it comes to 2nd phase fights. The enjoyment of it is replaced with frustration because of overuse. However, that on its own isn't the only issue with 2nd phase fights. Unfortunately, many first phases are tedious to slog through, whether it's the health-heavy King of Puppets, the super reach of Andreas, the surmountable but slow movements of Laxasia, or the relentless aggression of the Nameless Puppet and the Green Swamp Monster. Very few of the first phases are easy to master, and when you finally do get the hang of it, you still have a 2nd phase to learn and conquer. And every time you fail, you must prove what you've already proved before, that you can beat phase 1. I think it's tedious and a tremendous waste of the player's time. Either craft quick first phases, or allow players to skip to phase 2 after proving their worth in phase 1. Or even better, just have both phases be part of a single health bar, instead of a separate one. Ideally, a Soulslike would have 2 or 3 of these sorts of encounters across a varied roster, not jam them into half of the mandatory fights. And hell, I didn't even mention both encounters with the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, which are both 4-on-1 fights. It's ridiculous. Of the 4 remaining criticisms, 3 go hand in hand. So let's talk about the remaining one, the insane reach of these bosses. One reason I'm so confident in my assertion that you're meant to play an in-your-face style of combat, like in Bloodborne, is because bosses are extremely capable of closing large distances quickly. I'll show some examples on screen, but Andreas can turn and reach you with a stomp from forever away. The green swamp creature has a charge that can easily stretch half the arena while also being unblockable and not limited to a single set line of attack. The nameless puppet has a forward burst that closes gaps quickly. Even the slow as molasses door guardian has a roll move to reach you fast. The point is, they don't want you getting too far away from the bosses, probably because of how overpowered and tempting consumable throwing items can be. The problem though is that sometimes as a player in a Soulslike, you just need a moment for a breather. It's hard to use health items or restore your weapon durability, manage status ailments, or toggle between items while continuing to dodge and block perfectly. You are asked to manage a lot while fighting bosses, and it can easily overwhelm. Punishing players for seeking a breather seems downright cruel, but Lies of P bosses insist on doing it a lot. Once again, be perfect or be punished. And then there were 3. Short parry windows, unlimited stamina, and long combos. I feel like these are self-explanatory, but when a boss has all three, like Nameless Puppet, Simon Manus, and Andreas, it leads to being overwhelmed quickly. Bosses are capable of chaining together moves containing 3 to 12 hits, with each variation having different timing. There's also times where bosses can break out of combos early depending on the player's positioning, so you can never be quite sure of when it will end. On top of that, many bosses can immediately loop back into another attack, giving you hardly any time to recover stamina, health, or, just attack the boss. Crazy, I know, right? If you're extremely talented, you can hit the perfect parries on every single attack, and if you've invested heavily into stamina, then you might just be alright. If not, there's going to be a ridiculous amount of sensory overload as you try to juggle everything that is being thrown against you at a single time. Oh, not to mention, many bosses inflict status ailments that can sap your health and break your weapon. It's a bit too much, far too often. As a result, many of these bosses lack the back and forth flow that From Software's best bosses have. It's easy to acknowledge that I'm not skilled enough for some of these fights, but it still seems that the skill floor is set way too high for some of these encounters. The result is an unyielding sense of unfairness, and so why not fight fire with fire? It's crazy how many guides online don't give you specific instructions on how to fight a boss properly, but instead emphasize cheap tactics like strafing, using consumables, or summoning an NPC Spectre for help. And if you aren't cheesing, you're just hoping to get lucky RNG to avoid big combos and simply outlast your opponent instead of fighting them properly. It becomes a war of attrition, sadly. It shouldn't surprise you to learn that I did summon the NPC for a few of the fights. I should note, these are not real players, there's no multiplayer in Lies of P, these are just AIs. But no, I don't feel that summoning robbed me of the experience. Instead, here it felt like evening the odds, as only one fight, Laxasia's, was made into a cakewalk by summoning. I think I summoned for like 4 or 5 bosses, and that was the only time the fight was trivialized. When being assisted balances fights instead of trivializing them, then perhaps something is a bit off. To be clear, tough bosses deserve roster spots in these sorts of games, but I think Lies of P crammed in too many, each with their own annoyances. And because of these issues, many bosses don't feel like they're playing fair, which is a huge sin for From Software style titles. Discipline should be expected from the player, not perfection, but Lies of P can't help itself. And yes, I'm sure many players didn't have a problem and I'm just bad at the game. Sure, skill is an issue, like I said, but it's possible to design challenging fights, devoid of these issues, without spamming them. Lies of P struggles with half of its bosses, but luckily, the other half are quite good. So let's have a look at those to get a break from the negativity. And it's important to do that because Lies of P, outside of these 8 specific fights, is an excellent title, the best Souls-like I've played since Hollow Knight. There's plenty of enemies that act as fodder, easy to be churned through quickly, but still capable of posing a threat in numbers. Tougher enemies also roam the streets, swamps, and cathedrals that you'll journey through. Many of them deliver great, balanced one-on-one fights that give you a rush after defeating them without taking a hit. This is particularly true of the many Stalker fights. You can think of these like encounters with other hunters in Bloodborne, although many of these are given the official boss health bar. Stalkers are often aggressive, but without the huge health bars and combos, so you can focus on learning the proper parry times comfortably. And of course, there's the remaining half of the main bosses. Parade Master, Walker of Illusions, Door Guardian, Fuoco the King's Flame, Mad Donkey, and Corrupted Parade Master all feel excellent to square off against. Notably, most of these are slower enemies who are easier to react to, but they each find ways to provide appropriate challenge. They have powerful attacks, but they also give the player time to breathe, assess, and react with some reasonability. By far though, my favorite encounter in Lies of P was with Champion Victor, a mutated, muscled out luchador who looks a lot like Batman's Bane. Victor has a second phase, as well as the ability to reach you quickly, but it's done so much better here. His second phase isn't split into its own health bar, and his combos don't really exceed 5 hits, and they're all telegraphed to give the player appropriate time to react. Dodging actually feels like a viable tactic here, one of the few instances in which that's true, and it goes hand in hand with parrying, and that level of choice made for an excellent fight. He can still destroy you easily if you aren't careful, but it feels so much more like a back and forth instead of an attempt to endure. I wish the game had more fights that challenged at this level instead of raising the skill floor to unrealistic expectations. Souls-likes are often judged hardest for their boss design and difficulty, and I think Lies of P just took it a step too far. All of the From Software tropes that make our eyes roll are dialed up to 11 here, overused and overstaying their welcome, infecting many fights instead of just a few. It's a good thing Elden Ring didn't release until just last year, or else I'm sure half of these already tough fights would have had Malenia's regenerating health. And pause the video right there. This is editor NopNapNarp from the future, tuning in to let you know that somehow I forgot, but bosses' health bars do regenerate in Lies of P. If you don't stay aggressive in the fight and you try to back off, they have a health bar that will recover as well. If you don't consistently hit them, it'll incrementally increase, just like your health bar does when you rally against them. The bosses can do the same thing to you, even without hitting you. So add that to the list as well. Just fantastic. Alright, back to the video. The problem ends up being that the combat system seems confused on what it wants the player to do. It tries to give them options, sword and shield endurance, parrying and deflecting, and guarding, but each is useful at different times, and those times aren't made clear within a reasonable time to react. As a result, I never found myself getting into a smooth groove. It was always good enough to overcome regular enemies and slower bosses, but it felt like a nightmare when coming face to face with heavyweight contender after heavyweight contender. Difficulty is subjective. Some will love this, but I certainly believe it's taken a bit too far here, and those are the reasons why. Okay, now I get to talk about everything else in Lies of P. And let me just say, I think all the other elements of game design are done spectacularly with just a few hiccups. Character building. Wow, there are so many ways to customize your version of P in terms of looks, stats, and loadout. Truly a staggering amount to consider. Simplest of all are the looks. While P does have armor with stats, it isn't visible armor, meaning you'll never have to experience the tension between fashion and gear stats. The armor P dons is internal mechanisms. Better ones weigh more, slowing your movement and roll, as you'd find in Dark Souls. However, the clothing and masks you choose to wear will always shine through, divorced of stats, allowing for a true aesthetic customization. But we're just scratching the surface. Next up is your loadout. 2 weapons can be equipped at a time, along with amulets with modifiers, such as more health, more damage to certain enemy types, etc. And then of course, those armor pieces I mentioned. However, borrowing from Sekiro again, you can customize P's mechanical arm with a host of different abilities that each have their own bar separate from health and stamina. These include an electric discharge, a spewing flamethrower, a shield, a gun blast, and more. Each has their own properties and elemental affinities, and I found myself swapping a few times throughout my playthrough. Taking another page out of Bloodborne's book, many of the weapons can be disassembled into handles and blades and can be mixed and matched amongst each other to provide unique armaments. You see, each handle and blade has a unique ability that can be used in combat at the cost of fabled charges. If you like an ability on a certain blade, but don't like its handle ability, you can swap it out for something else that better fits your playstyle. This game goes from having a handful, maybe 25 to 30 weapons, to having potentially hundreds and thousands of unique combinations to try out. Whatever floats your boat really, and I think that's amazing. The room to experiment is there for curious players, while each weapon on its own is capable of defeating most bosses so long as you've taken the time to properly upgrade them. And to add even more customization, there's the P organ system. At the hub, P can sit down in Geppetto's chair for modifications at the cost of a rare currency called quartz. These modifications grant you useful perks like extra healing charges or the ability to dodge roll while downed, while also gifting stat increases like more health recovered or less damage received. And if that wasn't enough, there's a customizable cube that can be loaded with a specific perk like faster stamina regen, healing NPC summons, or more uses of your Legion arm abilities. It leads to a truly staggering ability to play your way, and I love that. Switching parts in and out seemed like a requirement against certain bosses, and that got me experimenting, pushing me towards this plethora of options naturally, instead of forcing me to do so. So bravo. Of course, I haven't even mentioned the character building in terms of hard stats. There's 6 stats. They have different names, but they're basically health, stamina, carrying capacity, strength, dexterity, and a third damage category called advance. Each of them is pretty straightforward. The ability to respec is granted halfway through the game, but I often felt tense when leveling up. That's because Lies of P doesn't do a tremendous job of providing you with an ample amount of ergo, the currency you use to level up. I found myself exploring a lot and tackling almost every optional boss, yet I found my abilities couldn't keep up with them. By the end, it felt like every area was only granting me a level or maybe 2, and I found myself dipping into my ergo items frequently just to get some extra cash. The strained wallet made each choice of what stat to increase perilous. With so few levels to go around, one misstep felt like a failure. This is detrimental to new players who may not know what weapon type they want to focus on, strength, dexterity, or advance. By funneling points into the wrong build, it can be the difference between life and death. Again, you can respec, I get that, but it isn't free and only gets more expensive each time you do so. And the currency you use to respec also regenerates over time. So if you want to respec but are light on currency, well, I guess you're just gonna sit there letting the game run, or you're just grinding the same enemies for ergo, a total pace breaker. Ergo acquisition rates could have used a boost to offset this feeling of being constantly underleveled. This aside, customization in Lies of P is as vast as you'll find in the Soulslike family of games. Okay, let's talk story. As previously mentioned, Lies of P tells the tale of P, a puppet who awakens in an abandoned train station. Your short adventure to the local hotel reveals the city of Krat has gone to hell, as frenzied puppets attack humans while corpses are rising from the dead in some weird, mutilated forms. After meeting some of the locals at the hotel, including Sophia, the level lady, Antonia, the owner, and her puppet butler Polendina, you're tasked with finding your creator, Geppetto. After reuniting with Pops, you'll also save another important Puppet Empire contributor, Vanini. Alongside of Geppetto, Vanini helped revolutionize Krat as the city of the future by introducing puppets capable of doing work to free up humans for more relaxation. But something has gone wrong. Both men surmise that the king of puppets, Romeo, must be the one responsible for why so many of them have gone rogue, slaughtering anything in their path. The Grand Covenant is a master plan built into every puppet, requiring them to aid humans, always tell the truth, and not engage in violence, but something has clearly overridden that. After defeating the Puppet King, the frenzy seems to die down, but without the war-waging woodcrafts, the rising corpses of the dead are free to roam. It seems to be the final result of the petrification disease that's crippling Krot now. It's revealed that this is caused by ergo, a force that transcends life and is left behind after a person dies. It's like a materialized version of that lost soul. After defeating Champion Victor, a man named Simon Manus, head of the religious cult Alchemists, reveals he's using the power of ergo to transcend humanity. He sees ergo as a liberator of human limitations, and seeks to channel a tremendous amount of its power to become a god, forming his new world in the process. After an attack on the hotel in which Geppetto is kidnapped, P makes his way to the Isle of Alchemists for a final showdown. An epic but kinda bullshit fight with Simon Manus eventually results in your victory before the final twist is officially revealed. Anyone who's played Bloodborne shouldn't be surprised to learn that the final boss is, of course, Geppetto. After a few hours to soak in this Bloodborne-inspired world, I met Geppetto, and I just knew he would be the Gehrman of this game. Engaging with optional dialogue will reveal this twist a bit early, but it was Geppetto who caused the puppet frenzy. The unwritten first rule of the Grand Covenant reveals Geppetto has full control over all puppets, except P. Geppetto built P but didn't include the restrictions because he was meant to be a tool. P needed the ability to lie to bring people to his side, but also needed to engage in violence against humans. With these abilities intact, P would be capable of taking back the city of Krot after the Frenzy Uprising. But why do all of this? Well, it's revealed that Geppetto lost his son Carlo, and the loss severely broke him. Everything he does now is for the opportunity to restore Carlo's life using the power of ergo while creating a safe world where no harm could fall on him. Carlo's ergo is trapped in P, the puppet acting as a vessel for the son's memories. Geppetto is a man trapped in his grief, but even more so, he is made deranged by it. He incites the puppet frenzy so that humans will be killed off. With only puppets remaining, all under his control, no harm could fall to Carlo. Meanwhile, the alchemists were busy farming all the ergo into one centralized location, and once P defeated them, all that power would be just sitting there, prime for the taking. Only one thing would be missing: the heart of P. Geppetto believed that P, with his duty complete, would lay down his life to restore Carlo, but this decision is left in the player's hands. Just like kneeling to Gehrman, the player can surrender their heart and get the bad ending of the game. Carlo is revived, but Krot and its inhabitants are left utterly broken and beyond repair. However, the player can also choose to resist, leading to a fight with the nameless puppet, Geppetto's first creation, who's tasked with taking the heart from you. I fought that damn boss for 4 hours, and I made no real headway, and since you can't summon for it, I caved and gave Geppetto my heart, finishing the game, but not in the satisfying way. Again, the boss didn't seem to play fair, so I wasn't about it. Regardless though, if the player triumphs, they can receive 2 alternate endings. In both, the nameless puppet, freed from Geppetto's control, lunges at P for a fatal blow, but Geppetto steps in the way, realizing that without P intact, Carlo could never live again. P uses the moment to incapacitate the nameless puppet, and Geppetto dies. But before doing so, he will say one of 2 things. He will either embrace you as his son, or admonish you as a useless puppet. The embracing of P by Geppetto represents the true ending of the game. But what causes the difference? Well, one mechanic I've left out until now are the dialogue options. There aren't many, a few required ones and some other optional ones, but each is keeping track of a hidden stat. All of the conversations pose the same moral dilemma at the core. Tell the truth, feeding into your puppet nature established by the Grand Covenant, or lie and become something closer to human. What would a Pinocchio story be without telling lies? Fitting in with the darker, more mature ideas and visuals presented in the story, Lies of P flips the tale of Pinocchio on its head. In the Disney movie, Pinocchio becomes human when he chooses to be truthful, honest, noble, and brave, but that isn't the case here. Lies of P asserts that lying is one aspect that defines humanity, but also paints the important difference between lying to harm and lying sympathetically or empathetically. Only if you choose to tell lies throughout the game, like telling an old frail woman that she still has the beauty of her youth, or telling a man that a puppet did indeed love him, or telling an old woman that her baby doll is a real child. Only through these lies can you reach the true ending. It's a fascinating inverse of the tale told beautifully, resulting in the true ending. As Geppetto dies, P lets out a tear, signifying he's become human, and the old man realizes that in all but body alone, Carlo now lives on, and so he apologizes. I won't lie, this might be the best example of storytelling utilizing the typical vague Souls-like approach. There is plenty of lore to uncover about Krat, the alchemists, and every NPC, but the game isn't afraid to tell its own in-the-moment story. Instead of letting us scavenge a world long ruined by apocalypse, we're free to engage with the lore on our own terms, as it's presently happening, while still being delivered a good story full of characterization, plot twists, and a mirrored theme. Hell, there's a whole other character in Gangio who is sort of pulling the strings even more so than Geppetto, but that seems to be setting up a sequel or DLC more than anything else. The narrative here on its own is compelling, and ended up being a strong motivator to push past the tougher boss fights, even if it meant summoning or cheesing. I wanted to see where the story was going, and it never disappointed, even though I predicted early that Geppetto would be an antagonist. So, on its own, the story provided an interesting tale, and it was further supported by the typical NPC questlines you're familiar with if you've played a Souls game. All the ones I managed to complete found ways to incorporate the theme of lying into them, which was smart given how integral it is towards the overall theme of the game and of the Pinocchio IP. For example, the most involved NPC questline is centered on a man named Alidoro the Hound. This NPC is the one who sells you boss weapons in exchange for their ergos, but something always seems a bit fishy about him. Through his dialogue, and by interacting with those who know him, a facade becomes evident. Alidoro is said to be a brave, courageous hero, but at every turn, this guy appears to be a coward. Eventually, you piece together that he is lying, and upon confronting him, he will confirm that he killed the real Alidoro and took over the mantle after years of being his partner. Now, he's working alongside the alchemists and is taking the strong ergo relinquished by bosses to them to fuel Simon Manus' delusional vision. What an epic way of tying mechanics into storytelling. This fake Alidoro runs into boss arenas after you beat them, grabs up that weapon, and then sells it to you in exchange for a powerful soul to fuel his boss's mad goal. It's perfect, but it also does a great job of tying the theme of lies into more than just the main quest. And honestly, one of the best marks of a good story is if it leaves you thinking about the themes presented, and that certainly happened here for me. P's ascendance says a lot about the nature of humanity, in both its pros and its cons. Lying is a characteristic unique to humans, and it plays the biggest role in determining if you get the good ending or the true ending. By weighing truth and lies against each other, P is grappling with the moral quandary of honesty versus empathy. Is it better to be straight up with others, even if it's difficult? Or should we lie to protect those we care for? Regardless of what you choose, the fact that P even has the option alone is in part what allows him to be human. If humans are the only creatures capable of lying, it's evidence of a higher level of moral and cognitive reasoning. By not instilling the Grand Covenant inside of P, Geppetto, in a way, grants P humanity by allowing for free will to be paired up with a head full of memories. That's why in the true ending, Geppetto comes to realize that P has essentially become Carlo in everything but flesh. The former puppet has the memories of Carlo, but he also has the ability to lie, suggesting that he can empathize, and by shedding a tear, he's also gained emotional intelligence. The characters are well done, but it's this strong central theme that carries the emotional weight of the story, and it holds up. And it holds up well, resulting in probably the best story I've seen in a Souls-like game. While the game borrows Sekiro's deflection system, there can be no doubt that Bloodborne is the biggest inspiration for the title's art direction and atmosphere. Krat is beautifully macabre. Its stone streets are littered with burning bonfires, as creepy, animatronic puppets replace the normal folk you'd expect to see. Winding roads and alleyways grant the location a sense of scale and believability. Gothic architecture can be found all around, each varied in their appearance, but uniform in setting the tone of a land as ruined as this. And just about everything included is meant to evoke an uneasiness in you, instilling a sense of fear for what lies around each corner, and in this instance, it works. It's wonderfully realized, and it only extends further as you leave the city streets behind. Whether it's a desolate, barren swamp, a shattered cathedral with a few remaining points of pristine beauty, or a massive factory dedicated to the production of puppets, it all wows. Well, except for Alchemist Isle, which certainly leaves a bit to be desired visually, despite providing some of the game's most impressive scenic moments. In terms of sound work, even more has been lifted straight out of Bloodborne. I swear, the sound effect that plays when picking up an item is damn near pitch perfect with the one from Software's legendary Gothic Nightmare. Audio cues to warn you of incoming undodgeable attacks are sharp and sting the ears like a monster's howl, indicating that you've entered do or die territory. And you'll find just a lot of other sounds that bring the game world to life, granting it a thick atmosphere, like the sound of the boots hitting various terrains, or the way this mad puppet clown giggles at you as it fights. And the OST is pretty damn good as well, a lot of ambience most of the time, but really ramping up during those intense boss fights as you'd expect. One of my favorite pieces plays during the fight with Archbishop Andreas. This is a man turned into a beast through the sin of greed and a dose of the petrification disease, and his fight is accompanied by beautiful vocals evocative of a church choir. Excellent work found here. In terms of technical issues or bugs, and I'm happy to report I didn't run into many while playing on my Xbox Series S. The most notable element would be the camera that, in typical Souls-like fashion, goes absolutely crazy during some of the boss fights, almost doubling as another opponent to scrap with. Outside of this, I ran into a few FPS drops, but these normally came at the hotel and not out in combat, making it slightly more acceptable. And really, that's about it. Some pop-in textures, but no real major issues or crashes to report. And I can't wrap up this video without taking a few moments to highlight some of the changes introduced here in Lies of P that I'd love to see carry over to From Software games. First and foremost, I love that you don't automatically lose all of your uncollected ergo after dying twice in a row. If you die, you drop your currency, but if you get back to that spot, it can be recovered. Simple enough, but here, if you die again, you lose a portion of that total ergo instead of forfeiting it all, which is a little more forgiving. However, it's balanced because every time you take a hit, that number drops by a little bit. Leeching off of this, it's brilliant that dropped ergo spawns outside of boss rooms. That way, if you die to a tough fight, you don't have to engage that battle again to recover your currency. There's also a way to restore your pulse cell charges, granting extra health recovery for skilled players. Oh, and your ergo counter will change to a bluish color when you have enough to level up. That's awesome. And finally, I just love that when fast traveling, if you're holding a noteworthy item or have new dialogue available with an NPC, then the game just outright tells you that. They'll show you an icon next to the corresponding location. NPC questlines are so much easier to solve with all the guesswork removed, wondering when and where an NPC will be, and if they even have anything new for you. You never have that problem in Lies of P, and it allows for the story beats to flow much smoother. It's these small things that make Lies of P one of the best Souls-likes ever made. It would be impossible to divorce a conversation about Lies of P from its obvious sources of inspiration. The developers are clearly huge fans of From Software's works, and have attempted to blend elements from each of their titles into Lies of P. Some work out well, and some not so much. This is most evident in combat, where aspects of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro have been morphed together into an amalgamation. A functional amalgamation, but an amalgamation nonetheless. When sweeping the streets of Krat or taking on properly balanced bosses, it's quite easy to let some of these issues roll to the back of your mind. The same can't be said for some of the tougher boss fights that accentuate the problems with combat while introducing tedious, frustrating, and unfair issues of their own. There's just so many of them, from short windows to parry, to only being able to recover health after a guard, to second phase fights, to the lack of a dedicated posture bar, to the insane reach of bosses, to the limitations of stamina, and so many more. It's going to wear down a lot of players. The most skilled amongst us may have no issue completing Lies of P, but I do believe that the everyday gamer, along with some Souls veterans, will find themselves being annoyed and frustrated with the boss design in Lies of P. Maybe I just need to get good. Maybe I'm the problem. Who knows? That's the beauty of perspective. We can all play the same game and come out thinking vastly different things, and all those thoughts are true to our experience. For me, I'm still able to view this game quite favorably and fondly because, well, not everything you do is a challenging boss fight, and when those do give you trouble, there's often ways around it, except for that darn nameless puppet. Still, a well-crafted and thematically resonant story, characters that feel familiar yet mysterious, a beautifully linear world to explore, and a handful of great bosses really allowed this game to shine. For anyone who's been waiting for Bloodborne 2, this is going to be a great snack to hold you over, and if that highly anticipated sequel never comes, Lies of P might be the closest we ever get. And honestly, delivering one of the best Souls-like games of all time is still pretty impressive in its own right. While I do feel that Lies of P is close to being an all-time classic, being pretty great is still a tip-top place to be in. I'd stay on the lookout for potential patches that may force some of these bosses to ease up in various ways. I'm not holding my breath, but if they do so, the game will be even better. I feel confident and assured in saying that this is one of the best Souls-like games ever made, but I do feel a sense of caution towards the path we're on. It seems like From Software and many other Souls-like developers are constantly chasing the difficulty by pushing things farther and farther, and by doing so, we're starting to leave the territory where things feel tough but fair. This was already evident a bit last year in Elden Ring, where many bosses had similar issues to the ones found here. Malenia's health recovery comes to mind immediately, but many others were capable of spamming super combos as well. I don't want this genre to cannibalize itself by trying to push every game to the next extreme, leading more and more players to be weeded out. It's just a concern I have going forward. However, Lies of P is excellent, going toe-to-toe with From Software titles in some ways, but there are still some strings attached to this marionette, ones that could be severed for the betterment of a sequel and for the genre at large. Thanks for watching. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this lengthy look at Lies of P. As of now, this game is still sitting firmly in my top 5 on the year, but there's still a lot to come that could potentially knock it down some pegs, but we'll see. I do recommend this game to all Souls veterans with the caveats I listed at the beginning of the video, but if you are new, please go play either the remaster of Demon's Souls or Dark Souls first. Those are great jumping in points, This is not. Also, I'd love to hear what you think about Lies of P in the comments below. Did your experience stack up the same as mine, or how did it differ? On another note, you could probably tell I am just getting over a sickness, so if I sounded a little snotty and clogged up in this video, that's because I am. So forgive me for that. Hopefully with the next couple videos I'll be back to full health and sounding normal. As for those upcoming videos, we'll be looking at Starfield, Spider-Man 2, and Persona 5 Tactica, so look forward to that. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, join our Discord, the link is below, and as always, have a nice day and take care.